Thank you. All right, I'd like to call the September regular rules committee meeting to order. We are noticed today from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Let's go ahead and start with a roll call.
Felix Rivera.
Present.
Austin Quinn Davidson.
Here.
Jamie Allert.
Here.
Christopher Constant.
Here.
Forrest Dunbar.
Here.
Crystal Kennedy.
Here.
Suzanne LaFrance.
Here.
Cameron Perez Verdia. Pete Peterson.
Present.
John Weddleton. John Weddleton. Meg Zalatel.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. All right, so as usual, if assembly members want to get in the queue, please put yourself in the chat or text me if you can't access the chat. Also, as usual, for rules committee meetings, we can keep these informal, conversational. Okay, so let's go ahead and start going through the agenda. So first we have the report from the assembly chair and the municipal clerk. So few things to report on my end, then open it up to questions, then I'll turn to Barbara and then open it up to questions for her. So just want to reiterate the same request that I made last month during the August Rules Committee, which was to ask members to weigh the increased stress on our time during budget season as you consider any additional ordinances or resolutions you want to bring forward. Just as an FYI, the budget process should wrap up, cross fingers, at the November 17th meeting. Okay, so other topics. So first, alcohol tax. So later today, we're going to have our 5th work session on this topic to discuss any lingering questions that were brought up during the September 11th work session. And we should have folks there to answer those questions, or at least help us in having a discussion around them. As we discussed on September 11th, we will see what the administration brings forward when they give us their initial budget next week. So the alcohol tax will be a part of that budget, whether as a separate tab or in another format. We've had discussions about making sure that we can clearly see that in the budget. From there, I will consider additional processes as needed, but for now, there are no additional work sessions planned. So I'm going to have to wait until after I see the budget. Next is on the I Can't Breathe resolution. So I'm continuing to work with the clerk's office on a variety of the planks in this resolution. I think the one that we are closest to achieving is the plank on trainings. There should be several training opportunities organized beginning next month and into next year. And once finalized, I'll make sure to email everyone all of the details. We're just sort of in the process of finalizing all of that. Assembly office remodel. So earlier this week, Assembly leadership met with the administration to review the initial drawings submitted. And if folks can make sure you're muted, I'm hearing someone. Thanks. Earlier this week, Assembly leadership met with the administration to review the initial drawings submitted by the architect. And whoops, I actually forgot to get that ready. Barbara, could you do me a favor? If you have it readily available, could you pull it up?
Felix, the architect's drawing?
Yes.
Okay.
And specifically, I'd like you to pull up the one with the 7 offices.
Okay.
So I've asked the administration to work with the architect to see if there are other options to get us to that sort of magical number that we had decided early on in the process of 10 offices. This was well, almost a year ago. You know, that's what we told. Unfortunately, because of space limitations, they couldn't meet all of the requests that we had. So we looked at some alternatives to meet that 10 office minimum, which might sort of reduce some of the additional amenities that we had initially requested. We should have some new drawings early next month, so I will share those with you in October. And no rush on pulling those up, but if you can at least find them, and then I'll come back to this topic after the end of my report. So next is utilizing the assembly chambers. So Barbara is going to go into a little bit more detail on this, but on my end, I wanted to let folks know that I've started working with the clerk's office in response to a request that we received at the September 11th Special Rules Committee to see if we can transition some of our committee meetings and work sessions to the assembly chambers. The clerk's office has set a goal of starting this transition in mid-October. It just really isn't feasible to do it any earlier than that, and Barbara will describe why. And to be clear, it's not going to be all committee meetings and work sessions. Likely, we're going to do Friday work sessions at the chambers and certain committee meetings. That's all going to be determined soon, and it's likely going to be a phased process. But sort of have heard the request to see if we can start having some of those meetings in person, and the ability for the public to attend those meetings in person as well. And I think the chambers is likely the place that's best suited to do that versus the conference rooms in City Hall, which I think are too small sometimes to maintain physical distancing and all of the other requirements. Next is the website. So as has been described in prior months, I've been working with the clerk's office to do an overhaul of the assembly website. And actually, before I do the website, sorry, I'm going to actually go back. So here is the drawings that were submitted. Everyone can see them here. Barbara, could you do me a favor and zoom in so that we're seeing just the drawing part, or at least zoom in closer to the drawing part? And then if you can scroll down, awesome. So what this does is basically keeps the same layout as is currently in the office, with the doorway and then the reception area, and then puts the other offices around. As you can count, there are 7 offices in this space. So likely what's going to be happening is reducing one of these meeting rooms. So there are 2 meeting rooms that are in here. There's the 113 meeting room, and then Barbara, if you can scroll down a little bit more, there's the current meeting room that's in the office, which is the 115. So likely we'll just keep the 115, convert 113 into another office, and then we'll look at how we want to reorganize the work area and the coffee space that you see on the left-hand side to accommodate the additional 2 other rooms, offices that we need. So like I said, architect will come back to us because I know there's been interest in looking at the drawings and involved in that process. So we'll make sure to keep everyone in the loop. Okay, that's it, Barbara. You can stop sharing that. Next is website. So as has been described in prior months, I've been working with the clerk's office to do an overhaul of the assembly website. Sorry, Austin, are you trying to chime in?
Yeah, before you moved on from the in-person meetings, I just wanted to make it clear, I didn't hear this, so I'm sorry if I missed it, that the plan is to have a Teams version as well. So people can attend in public or in person, but they also could dial in by Teams.
Thank you, yes. Appreciate that. And I think that's probably one of the things that Barbara will go into more detail on when she gives her report. But yeah, that's a good note.
Got it. Thanks.
So I have been working with the clerk's office on the website to do an overhaul, specifically of just the assembly page. So we have formed an internal team to go work with a contractor on the issue, which includes Meg and John on the assembly end. Our goal was to get something done by the end of the year, and I had given direction to do this work with RDI, which was the preferred contractor after looking at our options. Unfortunately, the contract we got with RDI recently lapsed, and the administration is going through the process of re-upping that contract, which is likely going to take 4 to 6 weeks. So depending on a variety of factors, including getting OMB approval to let some of our 2020 budget slide into the 2021 budget. As a quick aside, for those who aren't aware, the rule is that you have to spend your budget dollars by year end or it goes into fund balance. So hence trying to get OMB approval. But it looks like this project will be completed in 2021, which, we really tried to do our best to get it done this year. In the meantime, you all have probably noticed a variety of recent changes which have been made to our website, which I think makes it easier to access and more user-friendly. We'll continue looking at those sort of simple changes that we can make, but I think a more comprehensive overview and rehaul of the website is really going to take that technical expertise and that contractor to come and do that. Next is the public hearing process. So as was requested at the September 11th Special Rules Committee meeting, I am beginning this process of sort of thinking about how we want to conduct public hearings with the Federation of Community Councils. That's who you all wanted me to start with. So during the September FCC meeting, I introduced the topic, and earlier this week, I sent a formal request to the FCC leadership to have this included on their October agenda, and I should have more to report in the Rules Committee in October. I have a few other items I'll report on during the Assembly priorities and under other items in our agenda, but that is it for now. Anything else members would like me to report on, or any questions before I turn it over to Barbara?
Felix, I think you have people in queue.
Oh, great. Yeah, so first I have you, Jamie.
Thank you. So I have one question, two questions. I think these are pretty easy. For the Eagle River, we don't actually have an office. So when I'm trying to meet with constituents, normally I'd like to go to Jitters, but it's loud and sometimes people want privacy. And of course, with COVID, that's not happening. Is there a possibility that the assembly persons out at Eagle River can get a space? I know we have some community rooms out here. I just don't know if that's something we can work in. That would be one question.
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring that up. So like I said, we've been having this conversation for a year. And so initially, so when it was Fred and Crystal, and Crystal, you can weigh in on this after I'm done explaining, but we had this conversation with the two of them, and whether they wanted to be incorporated in Anchorage or if they wanted separate offices out in Eagle River. And I think it would be specifically I forget the name of the building, but the same space where you have the library and your other offices, sort of uni offices in that same space.
Yeah.
Setting up an office there for you all. Fred and Crystal said no, but now it's you and Crystal. So happy to rehash that discussion and make different choices if that's what is wanted.
Yeah, I think so. I talked to Crystal about it, and I think we're on board together with it. Maybe we can address it a little further when you have time. Obviously, the sooner the better. And then my second question is, can I request now, or do you want me to send it to you an email, that could we look at opening up the Willa Marston Theater with the proper use of the mandates, that the people abide by the mandates at the theater on our Tuesday assembly meeting?
Sure. So consider it a request. You don't have to email me. So the request has been made. I will talk to the administration about that.
Thank you.
Thanks. Chris.
Thank you, Felix. So I'm curious on the number of offices. Again, I thought we were aiming for split offices with the districts in the end, but so if that's the case, we would only need 6 or 5, but 10 is great. I think it would be great that we each have our own office. And then the second one was, I'm curious about this request to OMB for extending the funds, because I thought that we had the authority to do that.
Just your first one, and then I don't know if either Barbara, Desiree, or someone from the admin can address your second one. So on your first one, so my recollection of the conversation, I think there were different opinions, but I think the majority opinion at the time was to have separate offices for a few different reasons. One is for future pairs, you don't really know if they're going to get along or not. Two is scheduling might be a little bit difficult if you're trying to share offices, or even if you have like a space where you both can be in there, so you have 2 desks in there. It still might be difficult to be able to share that kind of space between the two of you if you have constituents coming in. And then the last one was Open Meetings Act. and that was the most important one for me, was having two people in a room doing work. You might be doing different things, and then there's the open meetings considerations to take into account. So I think after having all of those discussions, the majority opinion was to try to keep individual offices.
And
but again, that's something that's
a great idea. I didn't remember that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And then the second question, Barbara, I don't know if Desiree's on this, but either you or someone from the admin, if you could address that, the OMB question.
Mr. Chair, is that for rolling the funds?
Yeah, rolling the funds. Yeah.
Okay. I don't really think I can give a precise answer. Could we respond to that in writing?
Actually, so I see Desiree's here, so maybe Desiree can try and respond.
I'm here if I can answer. I can give you a brief answer.
Go ahead.
So, as far as moving 2020 budget into 2021, it is an AR process that you guys do approve at a meeting. We just have to make sure that there are funds available as far as fund balance and all of that at the end of the year. So we work with OMB. It goes through the fund certification process. So it hits Lance and it hits Alex, and it goes through the whole approval channel and then gets brought to you guys.
So if quick follow-up then, that is interesting that if we budgeted the item this year that we would have to determine if fund balance is available. But I guess that's what the issue is in regards to the flipping of the calendar year.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, I don't see any other questions for my report. And thanks. So I just want to put in the record. So Chris Schutte stated that Wilda Marston is going to be open up this upcoming Tuesday for overflow. So thank you, Chris. That was quick. One less thing off my list. Okay, so then we'll go ahead. Thanks. So we'll go ahead and move on to the Municipal Clerks report. So Barbara.
Okay, thanks, Felix. So, I always report to you with 3 things. And so this time Felix gave me 9. So I have to figure out how can I talk to you about 9 things in a group of 3. So I figured out how to do that. I'm going to talk to you about the chambers, about training, and workload. So the chambers. And I don't have 3 things to talk to you about the chambers. I've got 4. So the first thing on the chambers is the sound. I think for those of you that were at the last meeting or participated on the phone, it was better, and we're going to get even better. We have 3 final adjustments. Of course, I have to do 3. There's going to be an adjustment with GCI. So if you've listened to a recording of the meeting, you can tell that people on the phone are very loud on the GCI recording. And they're doing a little bit of an adjustment with the equipment in the sound booth to fix that. The second thing that we have left to do is we're getting 3 new mics. And I think Mr. Dunbar will care about this the most because he will not have to share with me anymore. And the third thing that we're working on is we're getting a new bridge number. If you've listened on the phone or sometimes to the recording, if, for example, Miss Kennedy is speaking, we have about 15 to 20 other people on the phone. And so the bridge line is unmuted. And while Miss Kennedy is speaking, somebody might be microwaving something or driving in their car, and we can't mute all of those people. So we're going to have a new bridge number that will just be for the assembly members on the phone. There's obviously going to be less than 11 of you. And then the old bridge number will be available for the administration. So those 3 things are in process. Some of them are being implemented today. The rest will be implemented on Monday. And I'm hoping that we will have success on Tuesday, and I'll be able to take the sound project off of our list. The second thing I want to talk to you about the chambers is mobile video. So I believe Mr. Weddleton asked about this. We have an estimate for mobile video. It is about $30,000. The second thing that we need to do on mobile video is we need to set up an interdepartmental meeting if at least the Assembly, the Video Center, and OIT want to go forward on this project. And the third thing that we need to do is designate an internal project manager. So I will just wait to hear from either if a member wants to tell the chair and the chair wants to tell me to go ahead and set up that interdepartmental meeting for further discussion on the mobile video project. The third thing was a larger space. Again, I believe Mr. Weddleton asked about this, and I have three things. Number one, the code says if we need a larger space, we use the Will de Marston. And so as Ms. Allard has asked, it is going to be open for Tuesday night. The second thing I would like to say is if the Assembly needs larger or alternative space, like when we had the earthquake, we did it. We got you set up in alternative space. We met at the Emergency Operations Center. Or for the alcohol town halls, we did it. In January, we had meetings at the Will de Marston, at, I believe it was at one of the high schools in Eagle River, and we may have had one other one, and I've forgotten what that location is. So I want to let you know if and when the Assembly needs alternate space, we can do it. But we don't have a plan implemented ahead of time to say when we need alternative space, this is what we do. If that's what you want us to do, it's a continuity of operations plan. We can add it to the list of things to do. I just want to let you know that we have done it before and we can do it if it happens. You do have a problem with the video. That will not happen unless you go forward with that project. The requirement for the Open Meetings Act is that your meetings are recorded. And of course, for the earthquake emergency meeting and the town halls, we did that. Then the last thing I would say about a larger space, logistics are complicated with security, video. The OIT supports us with desktop and with the on-base system. And then, you know, of course, the clerk staff, you know, we're taking minutes and we're passing out papers and need a copier. So all of those logistical things are complicated. So my answer to a larger space is, number one, the code requires the Will de Marston. And if you need it for another reason, remember the logistics are complicated, but we'll do it. And you can get back to me if you have any questions about that. So now I'm going to violate my rule of threes and go to number 4 on the chambers. As Felix talked about, Ms. Kennedy asked about having committee meetings at the chambers. We're working on this. As Austin said, we're looking at a hybrid, which is very complicated. So I'm going to suggest that we would like to start with one committee meeting because we really want to see how it works. I hope you know that when I do something for you, I want to make sure that it's done well. And if it works, we'll implement it for other committee meetings as the chairs would like and for the work sessions. So again, some of you might be hearing from me because I'm going to ask you if your committee would like to be the guinea pig. Again, our goal is to do that. We'll have a report for everyone by the middle of September. So even though I've said three things with 4 on the chambers. Number 2 is training. I wanted to let you know that I sent you the email about everything you wanted to know about the website. There's tons of information on the website. I hope the email with the photos wasn't overwhelming, but the info is there. I have offered to do training for the assembly aides to go through the website. If your aide would like to attend, we're doing that, I believe, on Monday, October 5th. And she was so grateful and said she had no idea this information was available to her. So I really want to encourage you to ask your aides to sign up for the training on Monday, October 5th. And Desiree is managing the signups if you want to have your aide contact her. So the third thing that I'm going to talk about, Felix asked me to talk about workload. And so I think that there's no doubt that COVID and the Assembly Works schedule has increased the demands on the clerk's office. So I would say, and number one, you guys are doing more work, so that's more work for us. And so one thing that I would ask you again is if you could encourage your aides to come to this training, we could train them, and it gives us all more resources. And then the second thing that I would say is many of the new things that the clerk's office is doing for the assembly, especially related to COVID, are tech related. You know, we're doing Teams, thank goodness for Desiree. Felix and the clerk's office recognized Desiree as our employee of the quarter for all of the work that she has done figuring out Teams for us. So we did ask for a temporary person to join us to help us continue to work on these tech issues for the rest of this year. And obviously that person will be critical to helping us get these meetings set up at the chambers, you know, because they're going to be complicated with the hybrid idea of a meeting. And then the last point about workload that I'd like to ask is to please be patient with us. There's no doubt that we're all working hard to get our regular work done, plus the extra work related to COVID and the technology. And we just would like you to ask you to be patient. And that's it for me.
Great. Thank you so much, Barbara. All right, so I have a few folks queue on your report. So first I have Meg.
Thanks, Felix. Thanks for the update, Barbara. And I just wanted to pass on that at least 2 or 3 times using the auditory device for sound, it goes to fuzz. It seems to take care of itself after a minute or two, but I just wanted to pass that on, and I don't know if that's related to kind of some of the other issues or if it's just a bad device. So just wanted to put that out there in your facts about sound.
Thank you, Meg. I will add that to the list. And I can tell you that the vendor will be here, and I will remind the team to talk to him about that. At one time, they said that the antenna for that device was behind a concrete pillar, and that had been causing the problems. But I will let them know that it's still not working, and we'll get that addressed.
Thanks.
Thanks. Chris, do I have that? Sorry. John.
Oh, thanks. So Barbara, on the mobile video stuff, you know, my concept was more the full package to get us, you know, if we had to move in a hurry. So we have everything at the loose act, but all of a sudden the roof falls down there and we have a meeting. So we just take this huge box of stuff over to some other location and we set it up in a flurry and we have a meeting. And I'm suspecting, so was that your concept for 30,000?
That is correct, Mr. Weddleton.
Oh, okay. Well, shoot, let's do it. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Jamie?
Thanks. This is for Barbara. Barbara, I was checking to find out if the loop that goes around the theater chamber walls, is that set up yet? Or do you have an idea when it is going to be? And you know, the loop, because it coincides with my hearing aids.
Jamie, I have not been working on that. I think you've been working with other people on that. Is that correct?
Actually, I want to say Dean. So maybe I'll check with him. Okay. I just didn't know if there was a time frame because it's very distracting without the loop. So, okay. I'll check with Dean. Thanks, Barbara.
You bet.
Thanks. Crystal?
Thanks, Felix. My question was just in regard to the camp access on the Muni. It's not actually their webpage. It's just the Muni. Well, I don't know, maybe it is. Anyway, but to get to camps, I know I have to go through a bunch of hoops and actually have to have a computer to do that and that. So my question was, though, in regard to public access, I thought that was just employee access. So is there access to some of those documents that just the average public would have access to?
Well, I guess I can answer that question, Ms. Kennedy. This spring, we set up a team, and the team that's working on what we're calling the public portal, and it's the public portal to access those documents. The team is me, Jennifer Veneclausen, and Christopher Constant. And we have had a couple of meetings with OIT regarding the project. We have a definition of what the project is. And this week, the project was put on hold because of the ML&P migration. So that's all the farther we are, is having the project defined. And I believe it's on hold until November. So we know about that and we're working on it, but unfortunately it's on hold till November.
Okay, well, let me follow up on that, please. Just in terms of how we do get access for the public for a requested document, because my understanding is that if we want to see something that's amended and signed as actually finally approved, that's not available on the web page that we can currently give public access to. So is that true? I mean, can somebody actually otherwise find a signed resolution, or are they going to basically have to go through us and we'll have to go through the employee portal and get that document and then send it to whoever requested it? So if there's an easier way, I would love to hear that.
Well, I would certainly hope that there is an easier way. And here is my recommendation. Ms. Austin Quinn Davidson asked a couple of weeks ago if she could have an email address to refer the public to. And so we do have an email that's going to go out to all of you that's going to say, if the public has questions from the clerk's office, have them email this number, or you can call. It's the main email address and it's the main number. And what will happen when we get that email is that we deliver that to the staff. Staff gets those docs out to the public as soon as possible. It does take us probably about 5 to 7 days to get documents finalized and signed. And I will tell you that with some of your documents that have, more than 5 and sometimes 30 amendments, it might take us longer than a week to get those done. But as soon as those are done, we have a list of people who requested it and we send it out immediately. So I would just encourage you to send those directly to the clerk's office. You can tell your constituents to count the main number if you don't, the main clerk's email, but if not, just forward them to me and I'll get them to the right place and we'll get them the documents as soon as they are available.
Oh, thanks, Barbara. That helps, because I know there are some people that just want public access, where they just get online, make the request, it's done. But it sounds like, excuse me, it really has to go by request to personnel. So that helps a lot, though. That's good. Thank you.
Thanks. Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Crystal. Just to note, though, that the plan is, as soon as we get the project done, that the public will have direct access to all the files going back to, I believe, 1967. And so for the short term, because of ongoing work, we've been working on it since the spring, but COVID and everything, it's just taken us a while. And my practice is to email the clerk directly on behalf of, or the clerk's office, the staff, on behalf of the constituent request. So I get the item and then share it with them. But for now, that is the only way, or call the clerk's office directly, the constituency. But hopefully by the end of the year, beginning of the year, we have this tool set up again where the public can just access them themselves all the way back, as far as we have records.
No, that's good. That helps. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. All right, I don't see any more questions for Barbara. Thanks so much, Barbara. So we're going to go ahead and move on in our agenda. Next item is assembly priorities. Just wanted to give a quick update on the quarterly comprehensive update. So I've been talking about this for months now in this committee. And so as I reported in August, I've begun working with Northwest Strategies to complete a quarterly comprehensive update. I've given them a framework for the update and a variety of individuals to reach out to, including community partners, assembly members, and individuals in the administration. The PO with Northwest Strategies is to complete 2 updates by the end of the year. We had hoped to get one done in September, but that is less likely at this point, and then another done in December. So these should, I think, be pretty great updates for us to share with the community at large and at our community councils, and just considering the great interest that there has been in what's going on. And they should also help us gauge how well or not we are doing to achieve our goals that are outlined in the 2019-2021 priorities. So that was the only item that I had there. As soon as I get more information from Northwest Strategies, I'll make sure to share that ASAP with the rest of the body. But I think for the first time, feeling confident that it'll actually get done now that it's in someone else's hands. Okay, so that was it for that item. Let's go ahead and move on, unless there's any other comments on assembly priorities. Okay, not seeing anything. Let's move on to assembly member discussion on pending business and update from committees on any of their upcoming business. So I'm just going to start from the top of the list in alpha order that I see here. So first I have Jamie.
No, I'm okay. Unless you wanted me to discuss the audit committee. Sorry, I wasn't paying attention, Felix. Just to be honest.
No problem.
What was the question again? I heard committee.
Sure, yeah. So this is where we're doing individual assembly member updates as well as committee updates. So if you want to give a quick update on audit, that's great.
Yeah, it looks like, and you were in the meeting too, and so were several other assembly members. And it looks like everything that we discussed is going to go ahead and move forward so that we can approve it or disapprove it on the agenda. The other thing was we did discuss on that audit committee that folks that, and I believe Ms. LaFrance had brought it up originally, that we need to make sure that the supervisors take accountability when their subordinates are using the cards in the way they're not supposed to. And that we're also requested from the administration, Ron Haddon and also Mike, to follow through that if folks are making charges that they're not supposed to, that they do reimburse the municipality, which then reimburses the taxpayer for things that they should not be buying. And other than that, it was a good, and I don't have anything else to bring up.
Great, thanks. Next, I have Chris.
Thank you, Enterprise Utility Oversight Committee. For folks who are interested, I think this will probably get some attention from members on our meeting in October. Our next meeting, we're going to have an in-depth briefing from Chugach Electric on the Eklutna Water Project progress over the summer. And the hope for that committee meeting is that it doesn't turn into a whipping post for the various community groups to take over and try to make it, why are you failing us? But instead, to hear in depth the progress that they've done, and then the external interests can comment as a member of the public, and then that will set the stage for the next steps in that conversation. I've also reserved time on the agenda for them to provide a final briefing before the closing of the transaction of ML&P to Chugach, and that would be approximately 12 or 13 days before the intended closing. And so that's the action that's coming up at that committee, and it should be quite an interesting meeting. And otherwise, from a committee perspective, that's it.
Thanks. Forrest?
No update today.
John had a question for me.
Yeah, I see that now. John?
Yeah, so Chris, when you talk about the Eklutna Water Project, are you talking about the restoring the water for the salmon?
Exactly. The flow of water down
Okay.
that all those various parties are interested in and people have been driving for a long time. And so again, it should be quite an interesting presentation, a formal presentation from Chugach on the effort as it stands right now. What they did over the summer, just that's a briefing. And so again, I anticipate we will have members of those various other groups that are interested to be there and listen and ask questions. But again, this one will be driven primarily by Chugach.
Thanks. Okay, next I have Crystal.
I don't really think I have anything to add at this point, Felix, so thanks.
Thanks. Suzanne?
Thanks, Felix. Actually, if it's okay, I'd just like to bring up a couple things that aren't directly committee related. And is that all right? Or are we just on committees?
We're doing committees and individual stuff, so go ahead.
Okay. Okay, great. I know you and I had talked a little bit about a constituent request concerning CARES Act money information, and if there could be a frequently asked questions page. For example, some of the requests for information that have come up has to do with how decisions about disbursement of funds are made, and I know in some cases it's a lottery. And if it's possible to indicate who, especially in the instances for like businesses and nonprofits, and specifics about who got awarded money. So, those are some of the things that we're hearing that people would like to get more information about. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention, and this may not be the correct venue, but the Stormwater Utility Commission had its first meeting on Tuesday, and I know that the Stantec Award is on the agenda. And we had, passed a resolution saying that the commission would review that award before we took action, and I don't believe that they've had time to do that. So I'm just putting that out there, since this is publicly noticed and everything, and it's probably something we'll take up, I would imagine, on Tuesday. But also want to let members know that while I wasn't at the meeting, they did meet on Tuesday.
Thanks, Suzanne. So I'll talk a little bit about the Assembly Coronavirus Relief Fund website when in other items. So I'll address those points there. Pete?
Thanks, Felix. And on our agenda coming up Tuesday, there's going to be ordinance introduced to 2020-104. It's establishing the date of a runoff election within 3 weeks of the date of the certification of the election results. And so that's going to be coming up on our agenda, the first meeting in October. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete. Austin?
Thanks, Felix. So for Health Policy Committee, we're having a slightly longer meeting than usual on October 7th. The reason is that we have a lot going on, and I had asked Carissa to invite, and she did invite all members, not just the HPC committee members, because we're discussing some pretty hot topics that I think everyone will want to be there for. So it's from 9:30 to 11 on October 7th. We're going to do the normal AHD update. And then we're going to talk about the mental health first response consultant that the Assembly passed or appropriated money for, and we engaged a woman who Meg's been primarily working with. You probably saw that Jody Hetrick emailed the rest of you. I've been trying to work with her to understand how the core team is similar to or could overlap with some of the mental health first response that Bill Falsey and others have been working on for quite a while and trying to get up and running. So there's a lot of ideas going on there. The consultant's going to help us sort through that, and Meg may want to talk more about that when we get to her. Excuse me. The other thing we're going to talk about on October 7th is do a deep dive into the AHD budget, the health department budget. So we'll all receive budget docs on October 2nd, and on October 9th, the next Friday, as you know, Lance will run through all those budgets. For those of you who have been through it, it can be kind of overwhelming and fast. And so we want to take the time to spend a good chunk of time talking with the new AHD director, Heather Harris, and the committee on any changes. We anticipate there are going to be some new positions added and that there'll be a lot to discuss. So hope to see you all then. We're moving our November meeting to November 12th because of the election. It's currently scheduled to be 10 a.m. the day after the election on November 4th. And also we have an assembly meeting that night, which is moved to Wednesday because of the election. So we're moving it to the following week just so things aren't too hectic. And I think that's it. I guess I'll just mention I've been having with Suzanne as well, and had a lot of discussions about the alcohol tax. Particularly, we've been working with the health department and the theory of change proponents to try to really understand in a more concrete way what they're asking for, so that if there are ways that we can connect that with the work that we want to do. We've been asking a lot of questions like, what would the chief equity officer do? How does that relate to what you want? Where's there overlap? Where isn't there? Why would we need a new committee? Why would it, so anyway, we can talk about this in more detail in the next hour, but just want to let you know that's something I've been working on. Thanks.
Thanks, Austin. Forrest, I think you had a question or comment on Pete's report.
Yeah, just real briefly, and I'll try to remember this on Tuesday night too, but the item that Pete is talking about, I would appreciate if one of my colleagues would pull it off the consent agenda and then give me time to sort of declare a conflict before folks move to introduce it. Because I don't want to be part of introducing it, and I don't want to be part of voting on it.
All right, we can do that.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, next I have John.
Thanks. Nothing really totally new, but I'll recap anyway. AMATs, we're working on a new scoring system for the TIP, and that should be something we'll be looking at pretty soon. And also, we just finished the MTP 2050 or 40, and we'll be bringing that in as the long range transportation plan for Anchorage soon. I think we'll see that in the next month or so. And we're also starting on the MTP 2050. Which is due in, I think, just under 3 years. And I think a good point on that is a lot of the comments that came in for the 2040 plan kind of got brushed off as, hey, you're just too late in the game. But those will all be brought in as part of the initial step for the 2050, or they've already been brought in as a starting point. So, there's some value in that. CEDC, we're still working on changes to the marijuana code, and then, potential shelter licensing and kind of looking at what conditions would apply to a conditional use. We have this quasi-judicial procedures. Barbara's probably rolling her eyes, and if Mandy's there, that is probably 99.9% done. We just need to get it on an agenda to look at. And then personally kind of watching land use plan implementation with the RFAs and rezones and so on. But I think Shooty's on that pretty well. So we're starting to see things on our agendas. Handbook for citizen participation, it needs to be done. The EMT and fire split on the property taxes. I think this, we heard the other day a study's being done. So that's something I think is very important. And then, I have on my list to look at the way the assessments are done. And I haven't really done anything except aggravate Alex Sluka over it. And just how to handle, huge outliers. I mean, on average, we do great, but there's some outliers out there that are just make you want to whack your head. And we need to figure out a good way to deal with those. And kind of a long-term thing, we should rezone our dedicated parks to what is no longer a new PR zoning. It's since the new code came into existence, I think 2014 or so. That's been something that needs to be done. Those are highlights, but mostly I do the day-to-day work we are all wallowing in so desperately. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Meg?
Thanks, Felix. Thanks to Austin for queuing up about the mental health first responder consultant. I would solicit any questions you have about mental health first responders that you would like her to touch on. The idea is a little bit of a broad overview of what mental health first responders could be, a little bit of information about the 1115 waiver, which is a fiscal tool we could use. We'll also have Jason Lessard from NAMI there, who is both familiar with mental health first responders and participates in the CIT training for APD. So we can have that context of how those two different types of programs can work quite well together and complement one another. In addition, for the Committee on Homelessness, I wanted to also solicit any questions or concerns folks may have concerning winter shelter capacity. It's come up a couple of times. As we know, the Sullivan is at capacity. Brother Francis had to reduce its capacity after its COVID outbreak from 100 down to 63, 64, and it's full. And there's some issues of accommodating individuals with mobility issues at the Sullivan. So I've asked the administration and the coalition for the committee in October to do a real deep dive on what's the winter shelter plan. What are the outstanding issues? How are we addressing the issues we know? Are there any needs so that we can really get at this issue as early as possible? So if you have questions or concerns you would like addressed, again, the sooner you can get those to me, I will get them out to the relevant parties to do that. And that's the only thing I believe we're going to put on the agenda for next month, so that we can go as wide and far as we need to really look at that issue. Individually, I don't have, I'm thinking really quick, I don't have anything else to report right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Meg. So on my end, I don't really have anything in addition to report besides my chair duties. So that is it from me. So then let's go ahead and move on in our agenda. Our favorite topic, guys. So let's talk about Robert's Rules of Order. So we're going to start here. Barbara's going to put up the presentation. Thanks so much. We're going to start where we ended last time. And can you go ahead and do presentation mode, please?
Okay, Mr.
So,
Chair, not sure what presentation mode is.
yeah, no problem. So you see the save, the floppy disk,
Yep.
which, yeah, those were a thing. So if you go 3 icons to the right and click a button, bingo.
Are you good?
Oh, well, yeah, go. It hasn't showed up yet, but if you
Okay.
click that, I think it's going to start. Oh, why is it doing that? All right, I guess we can just take that off because that's really small. Yeah, on my screen it's really small. I don't know about other people's screens, so we'll just leave it there. So if you can go ahead, go to 11, and then I'll tell you when to flip pages. So last time we ended with a few different questions for a future discussion. So those questions are all on slide 11. Of note, we added one question based on Crystal's suggestion, which was, what are the rules of decorum for the public and what are the rules of decorum for assembly members towards the public? So let's go ahead and dive into it. First question, if we could, next slide, please. So, oh, and so this presentation and the next one that I'm going to give, they're both on the Rules Committee website. If members of the public are on the phone, you can pull those up there. So what are the rules for assembly members addressing each other by name directly, and what are the limits on personal attacks or insults? So Robert's Rules advises against members addressing each other by name, the idea there being to focus on issues and not individuals. However, Roberts also makes clear that sometimes there are established customs. And so it is our established customs, as long as we're doing it in a respectful manner, for us to be able to address each other by name. A member may declare, though, a point of order at any time if Robert's Rules is not being followed, even if a member is using the established custom. So it's something that's in our code, actually. 3.70.770, customary practice must yield to Robert's Rules if a point of order is declared. It's pretty clear in our code that Robert's reigns supreme if it's not in code already. So that's the sort of the long and short of that one. So I guess just to reiterate, it's our custom to use names, but we need to do it in a respectful manner. And that's sort of addresses both questions, right? So what are the limits on personal attacks or insults? We shouldn't be using personal attacks or insults because that wouldn't be addressing each other in a respectful manner. So any questions on that before we move on to the next one?
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Felix. Go ahead, Suzanne.
Sorry. Thank you. And just to comment on here, at other times, we've talked about addressing and ascribing motivations to individual members when someone's speaking, and just wanted to emphasize that it's been a practice of this body ever since I've been on it, to definitely avoid that.
Yes, correct. I think in one of the earlier slides, that point is addressed. So slides 1 through 2 through 10 addressed a bunch of other things, and one of them was talking about intent, and that's one of the things that we're not supposed to do. We, rather than assume intent, we should ask clarifying questions so that we can better understand each other's intent.
Thanks, Felix. Just wanted to emphasize that.
Yeah, thanks, Suzanne. All right, let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. So next question is, what is the role of the chair in maintaining decorum? So simple answer there, right? It is my responsibility as chair or any future chair to maintain decorum. The chair may interrupt a speaker if decorum is not being observed. And a member can also step into this role as well to declare a point of order, and that interrupts the speaker. I recognize the individual to declare their point of order, and then after that, I redirect the member based on that point of order if it's a valid point of order. If a member fails to come into compliance, then the chair takes back control of the floor and continues the proceedings. And there's actually another question later on. We'll go more into detail about how all of that works. Any questions on this one?
Felix, this is Crystal.
Yeah, go ahead, Crystal.
This is just a member to member conversation, correct? We're talking about from member to member. We're not necessarily talking about the public yet. And we're going to talk about that in a minute or two?
Yeah, we're not talking about the public yet. Yep.
I'll wait. Thanks.
We're getting there. Okay, so the next question, next slide, please. Oh, sorry. Was that you, Jamie?
Yeah. Do you want us to just go in queue? I don't want to, or do you want us to chime in?
You can chime in. That's fine.
Okay. So my question is, I think it relates to this slide in reference to sidebar conversation. So I'm way down on the far right and everybody else is to the left of me. And I hear a lot of sidebar conversation between you and fellow assembly persons. So I don't know if, and this is during like when we're supposed to be addressing other things. And so then they kind of slide in and they say, oh, da, 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 and then it's addressed. How are we going to address that in the future?
So I think just to clarify, so you're asking if sidebar conversations,
No,
if they are allowed or not? Is that what you're asking?
No, I know they're not allowed. I'm asking, how are you going to stop the sidebar conversations? So if someone's talking to you and we're having a sidebar conversation, but their mic's not necessarily on, but they're not necessarily in queue, how are we going to stop that from continuing to happen?
Thanks, Jamie. So I think that's actually, your assumption there is incorrect as far as I understand. So if, for example, like if the clerk wanted to have a conversation with me, or if Austin wanted to have a conversation with me, that's absolutely allowed to have those types of conversations. What isn't allowed is sort of violating Open Meetings Act. So those one-on-one conversations, totally fine. But if you're sort of more than that 3, then that's when you should be doing it on the floor. So is there additional clarity that you wanted to provide in your question?
Yeah. So I don't want to say any assembly members' names. I'm telling you that when I'm down there and other people have witnessed it, and I know Crystal can vouch for me on this, there is conversation between you and assembly members when they shouldn't be. So I understand if Austin Quinn Davidson is speaking to you, I understand if Barbara is, but there are other people who interject on either side of you. If you want me to say the assembly members' names, I can to show. What I'm trying to say is it goes on, and I'm asking if you're going to stop it from them making comments, because if they have a comment, they need to get in queue or they need to put on their mic and speak.
Okay, got it. Now I think I understand now what you're saying. So yeah, you're saying sort of the order of people speaking and making sure that we're not interrupting each other, I think is what you're getting to. So yes, that is something absolutely that it's the chair's responsibility, right? My responsibility to make sure that people are speaking in the right order. And it's something that we've is in these other slides about the floor. It's really important to respect who has control of the floor. And the short answer to that, the chair always has control of the floor, and the chair temporarily gives control to someone else. And unless I ask you to speak and I, say, okay, I recognize you, Mr. Constant, to give your point of order or to speak, then folks shouldn't be. They should either be in the queue or yeah. So that's how we should be doing things. I understand what you're saying, though. Sometimes individuals don't, and they chime in, and that's a practice that we shouldn't be using. I think there are a couple folks on this particular issue. So go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I don't think you actually captured what she was arguing, and I think that no one is going to tell me who I can or cannot talk to, when I can or can't, except for when it comes time to speak on the floor. If I'm having a sidebar conversation about any subject with anybody to the left or to the right of me, and you don't hear it, and I don't intend you to hear it, then you don't have a right to hear it. If there is a an open meetings side to that, that's one thing. But I mean, I could be talking about the candy bowl, or I could be talking about whatever I want to with the person to the left, to the right of me, all the way down to the end of the dais, the mayor's staff, or any of them. And so I think that there isn't a restriction on being able to talk with whomever you want to talk with, as long as it isn't in violation of that 3-member open meetings thing. So I think, Mr. Chair, you were slightly not interpreting what Ms. Allard was saying correctly.
Actually, I'm going to follow up with that. Chris, you're not interpreting what I'm saying. So when you speak, I'm just going to say it so we can just hash it out right now. When you speak to the chair and you interrupt and you whisper little things and then he does this and you guys are speaking, I can't hear you down at the far end. So it's not what you just said. It is what Felix did recognize, and he did get what I was telling him. I don't care if you want to talk about the candy bowl with Austin or something else. Okay. I'm talking when
Thank you
specifically lean up and speak to the chair. Thank you.
Thanks. Alex, you had something on this?
I was only going to offer that, you know, it was my experience when I was sitting down at that far end that the acoustics of the chamber are such that when you sit down at that far end, all the sound in the chamber funnels to you. I was sitting over in that chair and I could hear what Jason and Kate were talking about. So it's a characteristic of the chamber that where Jamie sits, all of the sound, unfortunately, funnels to where she is sitting from the entire chamber. And I don't know what you can do about that acoustically, but that is one of the characteristics I noticed when I was sitting down there.
Thanks. All right, so just one last, if there's any other questions on this slide before we move on to the next question. All right, let's go ahead, next slide rather. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide, please. All right, so when is it permissible for an assembly member to have an expert testify during debate on legislation before the body? What are the limits on expert testimony? So I have 2 slides on this one, and then we'll do questions if there are any. Robert's rules is pretty specific on here that it does not permit subject matter experts to weigh in during deliberation. Those kinds of things should happen during public testimony. But it is our customary practice as the assembly to call upon subject matter experts to answer questions before voting. We've all done it, and it's a customary practice. It's been going on for years. Robert's Rules also has a specific proviso around reading from reports or books as part of a member's speech. So any member may object to that, and then that requires a vote of the body to determine the outcome. Also, a member may raise a point of order, and then customary practice must yield to Robert's Rule. So, like I said earlier, that's a very clear delineation. While we might have customary practice, Robert's Rules in the end always is sort of the supreme if there are issues raised, like a point of order. So next question, next slide, please, and then we'll go to the queue. So Robert's Rules also further goes into, actually code further goes into adjudicatory or quasi-judicial matters. So code gives the assembly subpoena powers for these specific kinds of items. So we can bring in subject matter experts via subpoena for those matters. On other legislative items, nothing in code prevents expert witnesses, and so that's when we rely back on customary practice. A point of order should be raised if a member feels that expert witnesses are being abused, i.e. that they are not germane to the pending question, that they are repetitive, sorry for that spelling error, or dilatory. And we've talked about what dilatory means in the last time that we went through these slides. Okay, so that's pretty much it for expert witnesses. So to recap, customary practice, we use them. We should make sure that whenever we use expert witnesses, that they are not abused and that they are germane to the topic before us, and that they are not used in a dilatory manner. So those are the guidelines that we have here for expert witnesses. Go ahead first, and then if anyone else has questions after.
Thank you, Felix. And I'm by no means an expert on Robert's rules, and I don't have the definition of expert witness memorized. I imagine there might be a specific definition in Robert's rules, but in the law, expert witness means a particular thing. It's a certain kind of witness, and I want to make sure that we don't mischaracterize what some of the folks we are calling up to testify, or rather to speak to things during debate and deliberations are. So, for example, if we are, let's say we're working on Title 21, and we want to call Chris Schutte up because it's an administrative ordinance. We want to call Chris Schutte up to describe a portion of it. That is not an expert witness in my understanding of it. It's more like a fact witness. Nor is calling on, for example, like say we're doing a marijuana or an alcohol license, calling on the owner and after public testimony is closed and asking them clarifying questions. Those are not expert witnesses. Expert witness would be like, for example, if we had an ordinance that dealt with science and we wanted to call a scientist who wasn't directly impacted by the rule, but wanted to provide their expert testimony on it. But when we're talking about people who are directly impacted by an ordinance or are presenting the ordinance in some way, they are not expert witnesses. And I think at some point you can get at kind of the border of that, like who is exactly directly impacted by this, who isn't. Like, maybe it's a large landholder, for example, and, we are putting something in that is very close to them. Are they an expert witness or not? I think that could be a closer question. But for example, when we did Academy Vanguard, if we were to call on anybody from that neighborhood or to call on Christian Health Associates and say, what is the impact going to be or the price going to be, they are not expert witnesses. They are something else. But I'm, if Dean or Barbara or someone else has a different interpretation of Robert's rules, then I'm all ears. But that's my interpretation of it.
Sorry, hold on. Technical difficulties. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Yes, sorry. Sorry for not clarifying that at the beginning. I thought we were all on the same page of what an expert witness is. Yeah, you are correct in your definition of an expert witness. So it's a third party who doesn't necessarily have ties to the matter before us, but may provide the assembly with guidance or expert testimony, and all of these things. I wish Dean was here, but unfortunately he is not. All of these things have some, as far as I know, some pretty clear definitions and guidance to what these things mean. But I'll go in the queue, and then maybe if other folks need further clarification, we can do that. Crystal?
Well, thanks, Felix. I think Forrest is right. I think we have to be really careful about what we're trying to establish here, because there are certainly people that I think probably have a PhD at the end of their name that you could consider them an expert witness. But at the same time, there are a lot of people who have experience with an issue or an expertise of some level and familiarity that we really do rely on. And I think even the idea that we would exclude that from the debate aspect could be problematic because there are additional questions. I mean, I've seen this happen many times in the process of debating an actual issue. New questions arise, and you want to make sure that there's somebody there that can answer that. And so for a member to know maybe who those people are that would have the ability to answer some of those questions, I don't want to see us remove that kind of possibility for us. I mean, we need to be able to talk to the people who know the subject matter, whether you would consider them an expert witness or not. I mean, again, it goes back to the idea that, you know, we're calling on people sometimes who are either who have an experience with an issue. So I'm just saying that I understand trying to maybe really define the expert witness idea, but at the same time, I think we need that flexibility so that we make sure we get to the bottom of every potential question that we would have while we're discussing stuff. So I think we need to be really careful. Thank you.
Thanks. And yeah, I guess just to be clear in case it isn't. So, and just to reiterate what the slides are saying, right? It's our customary practice to allow expert witnesses. If a member feels like an expert witness is being abused, as the slide is showing in these different ways, then a member could raise a point of order, and we can deal with it in that way. But I agree that it's our customary practice for a reason to allow these types of things to happen, because they provide invaluable insight sometimes to the work that we have before us. Go ahead, Jamie.
Thank you, Felix. I agree with what Dunbar had said, that if we're going to do it, we kind of have, we should follow the rules. And his interpretation sounds right to me as well. I've read that. My concern was when we called in expert witnesses, I know I did from out of state, I kind of got backlash from it from the public. But that person didn't actually have a stake in the state of Alaska. So that's kind of like, well, how do we do this? And then when we're in the largest city in the state of Alaska, a lot of what we're doing has direct impact on those expert witnesses. And so then do we go into just asking that person as a witness the 5 or 6 questions? And how do we just have to go outside of the MOA to get those persons to chime in? Alaska's so tiny. So I hope that I will definitely be, I don't believe, and if I have, please correct me, ever questioned anybody's expert witness, because I'm open to hearing everything. And I want to show that respect to my fellow assembly members. So I hope that we could be a little like we're kind of doing now. That's all. Thanks, Felix.
Thanks. So on that point, code does not, as far as I understand, prohibit out of state testimony. I don't think there are any of those types of prohibitions, because I know I saw some of those same emails on that subject. But if someone more educated than I wants to correct me, they can do that. Next, I have Chris.
Thank you. So just the last bullet, I want to repeat that bullet right there. That because what Mr. Dunbar had suggested was that Robert's rules might have some definition of what expert witnesses are. It doesn't. It actually is pretty clear that when you get to deliberation, it's time for the members to decide. And the custom you're saying is that we can be more flexible and have been more flexible and probably should be more flexible. And so I just want to be really clear that it isn't a Robert's rules issue, it's a custom issue.
Thanks. Meg.
Thanks, Felix. So I would ask maybe that we consider in our customary practice that if you are calling an expert witness, to consider adding in, 1 to 2 questions, just kind of laying that foundation of how this person is an expert in the area, a little bit about their credentialing, perhaps. I mean, I don't need a resume, but that would probably be helpful to put some context to the advice or information they're providing to the body. So that would be really helpful to me moving forward. And it could be really simplistic, but I think it would help frame then the information provided. Thanks.
Thanks. And yeah, I know several assembly members ask those types of questions of folks testifying, just to get a better sense of who they are, why they're testifying, and sort of why they're an expert in the area. So having that done proactively, I think, would be helpful versus having assembly members ask those questions after the fact. Okay, any other discussion on this one before we move to the next set of slides? Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next one. So this deals with, it's one of two different set of slides around the public. So this deals specifically with persons testifying during a public hearing. What are the rules and restrictions on assembly members asking questions to the testifier? So simple rule is members have wide latitude to ask questions. Questions need to be germane to the topic and to the testifier's statement. What can a member do if they don't think that's happening? A member can raise a point of order, and if questions are non-relevant or of a dilatory nature, as Robert's Rules puts it. Under current public hearing procedures, members should listen to testimony and normally do not answer questions or respond to comments from testifiers. That's sort of our normal process. You've seen me do that, where I will say, we'll answer your question during deliberation, or I will say, I'll come to you offline to discuss that question. And then the last one, right, so this is sort of another Robert's Rules lingo kind of thing. So orderly conduct of business and making sure that we're able to conduct our business is really important in Robert's Rules. And so Robert's Rule says that members should refrain from asking testifiers questions that serve little purpose for the assembly or for the matter that is before us. And that sort of goes into that dilatory nature of questions. But otherwise, members do have sort of a wide latitude to ask questions of testifiers at assembly meetings. Any thoughts, questions on this one? Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to the next one.
Felix,
so this next one.
Before you move on, just quickly.
Yeah, go ahead.
You know, it's like this interesting place. All of these rules are guides, and the more strict we become, the less chance you have to ask or engage in a line of questioning that you want. And then there's the other side, which is like, well, we should always be limiting and let them talk. And in Palmer, you can't ask any questions of anybody. You just have to sit there and listen. And I hope folks appreciate the dilemma of having to balance all of those interests to come up with a policy that works for us. And that's it. I just wanted to put that out there. It's such an interesting dilemma because, sure, I would like one of my peers not to be able to go down this 25 question line of questions. But at the same time, if you're going to generally apply that principle, the same applies to me. And it's just very interesting, this conversation.
Thanks. Yeah, for my part, all of these questions have been raised by one or other members over the last few months, so I figured we might as well dive into them. Pete, you had a question?
Yeah, thanks, Felix. Well, and you know, sometimes we get people testifying that give us information that's surprising, and so occasionally we will want to follow up on what they said because it may be different from the information that we had already researched or received prior. And so sometimes it's hard to predict. I mean, you can't predict what someone's going to testify when they're up there. And so there are times when, you know, they're just, you know, from what they reported, what they testified on, it creates questions that, you know, someone is one of the members on the body is probably going to follow up with a question. So It just depends on what they're testifying about and what kind of expertise they have. Anyway, just my 2 cents worth. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. And I guess just to, I failed to do it this time. I've been trying to recap these slides. So to recap that slide, absolutely you have wide latitude. I think the guidance that's given in Robert's rules is just make sure that it's relevant to the issue that we have before us. That's all. And it's like I said, that's just guidance, unless a member sort of wants to make an issue out of it and raises a point of order. Okay, so now we're on this set of slides. So again, there's 2 slides on this one. So let me finish the 2 slides and then I'll open it up. So how does the chair enforce these rules? That's another sort of questions that's been raised by the public and by others. So the chair may interrupt a speaker at any time to inform them that they are out of compliance. You guys have seen me do that from time to time. Any ruling by the chair are subject to an objection and majority vote of the body. I don't know if I've actually seen that happen, but it's an option and an avenue for members if they disagree with the ruling of the chair. So Robert's rules lays out sort of a series of different enforcement mechanisms. So first is calling a member to order. That's usually the first warning, and many times the second. And that's usually how I will operate it. I will do that twice before I attempt to escalate something. So the chair is going to make a statement like, the member from downtown is out of order, or Mr. Constant, you are out of order, or the member from South Anchorage will come to order, or that is not in order. So you'll hear those kinds of statements, and that's so that is that calling a member to order. So that's typically the only one that's ever used. And typically we don't have to do anything else. But next slide. So next slide describes processes that I never want to use and hope to never use at all. But I feel it to put it out there so that this information is available, so that we all know. So the next sort of level of consequence is what's known in Robert's rules as naming an offender. So after repeated warnings, after repeatedly trying to call a member to order, the chair may direct the clerk to take down the objectionable or disorderly words used by the offending member and enter them into the minutes. So what that will look like is basically a clerk's note in the minutes that says the chair so-and-so assembly member did these things and they were not in order as declared by the chair. So that is sort of the next step, and I think that's likely the next step because it's a little bit more sort of a public sort of tisk kind of shaming. Then the next step described in Robert's rules is, if a member continually fails to adhere to quorum, sort of meeting after meeting after meeting, and it's getting in the way of business. I think that's another important aspect as well. It has to be disorderly for the meeting and sort of get in the way of us doing our business. Then the chair may consider removal from committees or committee chairpersonships, as Robert's rules puts it. Then the very, very last kind of thing that members can do, well, I don't think it's the very last, but in my opinion, it is the very last. So is censure. And you guys have seen this in the legislature used every now and then. The Assembly hasn't used it in a while. I think the last time it's been used was decades ago. So this is something that's not taken lightly due to the high regard for free speech rights of all members. So absolutely want to put that out there. So if all of the above have been used and the member fails to follow decorum, the Assembly may move to censure, which is a formal public resolution. So just like any other motion, it's a motion, second, debate, majority vote. So those are all of the sort of beginning from calling a member to order escalating all the way to censure, that's the tools the chair has to enforce the rules. Again, I will repeat, I would love to just stick to calling a member to order, and that's all that I've ever done. So it would be great if that's all that I ever have to do. Any questions, thoughts on that one?
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. So under Robert's rules, there's very specific procedures for the naming part of the process and taking down words. I don't know if you investigated what that process is like, or if Barbara wants to speak to that, but there are very specific procedures for that should those kinds of activities or behaviors occur.
Let me just look up. So I will say that most of this research was done by Dean. So let me just look up and see if Dean had anything in addition to say on that. So
I can read to you from Robert's rules if you want.
So I'll just read a little bit of what I have here. So after repeated warnings, the chair can name the offender and direct the clerk to take down the objectionable or disorderly words used by the offending member and enter it into the minutes. That's on the slide. After naming the offender, if the member obeys, the matter can be dropped or not. If not resolved, any member can move to order a penalty, or their chair can ask on his or her own initiative. And that's all that Dean put together for me on this item. So did you have anything else?
Yeah, straight out of Robert's rules. I just entered in this section into the chat right there.
I'll go ahead and read it then. From Robert's rules, disorderly words should be taken down by the member who objects to them, or by the secretary, and oh gosh, that's long. Or by the secretary, and then read to the member. If he denies, if he denies them, the assembly shall decide by a vote whether they are his words or not. If a member cannot justify the words he used and suitably apologize for using them, it is the duty of the assembly to act in the case. If the disorderly words are of a personal nature, after each party has been heard and before the assembly proceeds to deliberate upon the case, both parties to the personality should retire. I don't really want to read the rest of that.
Well, what that means essentially, Mr. Chair, is they have to leave the room and the body makes a vote. And so on the question of what needs to happen, so you can summarize to the bottom.
Thanks. Yeah. Okay, so I guess point of all of this is let's try not to have to use this mechanism in code or in Robert's rules, please. And so that means sort of maintaining decorum, and we've talked all about what that means, speaking to each other in a respectful manner, and all these other things. Because if we get out of order, then I will be forced to use these other mechanisms because it gets in the way of us doing our business, and that's just not acceptable. Okay, so then I think next I had John.
Can I jump in on that? Oh, sorry, I thought you were moving on. Oh, thanks. So on the censor thing, we all have gotten requests over the years to censor an assembly member for some action they did, which may or may not have been during a meeting. And my understanding is we don't really have a routine for that. I mean, what you're talking about here is kind of during the course of a meeting, there's certain ill behaviors, but that would be different than I think what sometimes the public asks us to do. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I think what generally what we get from the public, at least what I have seen, is sort of a singular instance of something, and maybe I shouldn't use the singular, but an instance of something that happened, and they ask for a censure because of an instance of something that happened. It could be that particular instance is a repeated pattern, or it could be that was sort of the one time that it was done. I think what the guidance that I have received from Dean, who did all of this research, was sort of censure should be a last I don't want to call it a weapon, but a last reprimand to be used by the chair. So, all of these other things should be done before you get to censure. Okay, any other thoughts or discussions on that before we move on? All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the last one, which I have 3 slides on this one. There's a lot. So rules of decorum for or towards the public. So slide 16 addressed some of those. So restrictions on asking questions to testifiers, which, to repeat, that slide basically said you have a wide latitude, just make sure that your questions are relevant to the assembly and to the issue before us. Department of Law did some additional research on this question, and here's basically what they found. So Robert's rules is pretty clear that the rules that apply to assembly members don't apply to the public, and that the public generally has greater First Amendment liberties, or I think freedoms, as Robert's rules puts it. The assembly can set our own limits because it is, I forget the term that's used, but it is a limited public, oh, someone save me. One of the attorneys please save me.
Forum. Public forum.
Thank you. So it is a limited public forum. So we can set some limits. So our code has actually the following limits. 1, that there's a time limit. 2, that the testifier should provide their name and residence. And 3, that the public comment needs to be limited to the item at hand. It needs to be relevant to something before us. The assembly may prohibit disruptive public conduct, including someone speaking too long, being unduly repetitious, and extended discussions on irrelevancies. That's how Robert's rules puts it. And so that's typically the way that I enforce that. You'll see me, if someone is on something totally irrelevant, I will ask them, "Excuse me, sir, but I need you to stay on topic to the matter we have before us." And typically, the way that I do things, I like to give people a couple of warnings before I shut them down. Robert's rules also talks about ejecting someone from the meeting, and basically what that is, they must actually disrupt the meeting, and there's a sort of an emphasis on the actually part. The Department of Law did research on some of this to help provide some guidelines here. So first is they looked up a court ruling, Acosta versus the city of Costa Mesa, and basically that outlines, and I think in some decent detail, what's meant by disorderly or disruptive or disturbing the meeting. So things like hand clapping, stomping of feet, whistling, making noise, use of profane language, obscene gestures, yelling, or similar demonstrations. Those all conduct substantially interrupts, delays, or disturbs the peace and good order of the proceedings. That's all taken from the court ruling there. Next slide, please. So to reiterate, Robert's rules and the code, they don't really provide, too many rules, right? And so it's sort of up to us to determine sort of the rules of decorum for the public within, of course, understanding sort of First Amendment protections. So there are 2 further things that I wanted to talk about, and then we can go into discussion. So I have the talking point here that I use all the time, and some of you maybe memorized it, right? So I say this before we do audience participation and before we start the 13s, which is the 13s is when folks can start doing public testimony. So that talking point that I say is, for testimony and public hearing items, please direct your comments to the assembly or the chair and not to anyone personally. Personal attacks are not appropriate. For public hearing items, your testimony must focus on the topic, not other items or subjects. I will, as chair, work to maintain decorum at this meeting and ask for your assistance. So that's the phrase I usually use. The guide bars that sets is no personal attacks, and your testimony must focus on the topic. Otherwise, that's all people have to determine how to act and what to say. So I think there was interest in how to better flesh this out for the benefit of the public. So from my perspective, I want to do as little fleshing out as possible. I want to leave wide latitude for the public, but if there's other ways that we want to talk about providing these type of guardrails to the public so that they understand sort of what's allowed, what isn't allowed, that's absolutely, I think, a discussion that we should have. And I provide some potential ways to do that. Last slide, and then we'll go to the questions that folks might have. Also wanted to pull out a couple things from the 2013 Citizens Task Force report. I've talked about this to you all in the past. So there are two parts in there that talk about public testimony. So first is, it is recommended that assembly members not use the opportunity to question those who testify to give more time to favored speakers by saying, quote, "Is there anything else you would like to add?" Quote, because it can appear that some speakers get more time than others. So that's one sort of guideline that this report sets out. And I should say, it's not really a guideline, it's just a suggestion. And then the second suggestion that they made was, similarly, assembly members are requested not to debate individuals who come to testify. Otherwise, those are the only sort of guardrails or items that I could find that have gone through sort of official local process. So with that, open it up to any thoughts or questions on this. If you all want to do anything else for this rules of decorum for or towards the public. Crystal?
Thanks, Felix. I guess in general, I just wanted to say that one of the things that I wanted to, that I'm hoping won't happen is that we don't turn into prosecutors. There is that statement there about not entering into debate for those that come to testify, because, for the most part, I think we're all there to learn. And then the conversation in our deliberations can be more of the opinion of what we agree with or don't agree with, or what we believe or don't believe. So I guess I just want to, I want to make sure that the people that do come to testify aren't made to feel like they're under trial of some sort, or that their expertise is being scrutinized to the point that they're being discredited. So anyway, that's kind of a big one to me. I may not agree with somebody, and it's up to me to decide if they're speaking truth that's valid or not, but it's not up to me to try to, in some way, prosecute them in that realm. So, but my question though, that I have for you, Felix, is what do we do? I mean, we have reasons to stop the public from doing certain things, but they didn't mention anything about the disruptiveness of silence. And, in some cases, we could certainly have somebody just standing right up there in front of the dais, just standing there, but maybe they're holding a banner, or maybe they've got some kind of, I don't know, dramatic interpretive costume on or something, or they're basically doing a bit of a silent protest. It's still disruptive, and it's disturbing sometimes to the public, and certainly it could be to some assembly members. So how do we justify basically telling those people that they're out of order because they're not being loud, they're not screaming obscenities, but they are definitely making a statement, so to speak, and carrying on a protest, so to speak? What kind of justification do we have for stopping some of those kinds of antics?
Thanks. So I'll go ahead and provide a response, and then I think other members might want to chime in on this as well. Also want to do sort of a time check. We've been spending a lot of time on this, which is great. I think it's a discussion we needed to have. And last, if attorneys want to correct me on any statement I make, feel free to. So from my perspective, I think protests are disruptive to the regular conduct of the body. At the same time, I have to weigh that with individuals' First Amendment rights. And so the way that I, as chair, have been weighing that is, or at least, trying to consistently weigh that is, if let's use the example of a loud protest, because it's much easier for me to respond to that. So if there's a loud protest, and folks aren't stopping, right? They're doing their thing, whether it's I don't want to use any recent examples, but they're doing whatever it is that they're doing. What I will do is I will ask for order, right? That's the first thing that I'll ask for. If I don't get order after multiple requests for order, and then also wanting to protect their right to protest, what I will do, and I think what's more beneficial to us as a body, is to ask an individual, or to pause the meeting likely, and ask an individual, okay, you guys are protesting, I see that. Does one of you want to speak your 3 minutes, and then we need to move on because we have business to do. We're doing the work of the people here. We need to keep things moving. That is something that I've talked about. I've never had to use that because we've never been in a situation like that, but I've talked about that kind of process. It would be the same thing, I think, for a silent protest. I would ask folks to come in order, then I would give them their 3 minutes, and then we would move on. I'm going to go to other folks who maybe have some additional thoughts, and then if you want to wrap up with any other thoughts that you have, Crystal. So Chris.
Yeah, thanks. The most crystalline example of this was the one time when we had some people laying on the ground and then they got up and stood up there with a sign and didn't say anything. And what I thought was interesting about that is we as a body, nobody said, hey, I object, something's out of order. And I think we chose the wise path, which was just to let them not say their piece in the time that they're allowed it. Because in some ways, as much as you can avoid an intervention that is in any way kind of disciplinary, the better, because it doesn't magnify and create more problems. And so as odd and kind of dilatory as that felt, I think we did do the right thing by just giving them 3 minutes and letting it go.
Thanks. Jamie?
Thank you. So I want to bring this up because I haven't brought up any of the decorum stuff to you, just for everybody to know. But since we're talking about it, when the folks were rolling around on the floor, that was extremely disruptive. And I did reach out to you, Felix, and said, hey, this isn't really respectful. It's actually distracting. And you said, no, you want them to be able to peacefully protest. Okay, we disagreed. You're the chair. When they stood up and held up their sign silently, I didn't have a problem with that. I didn't find it distracting. I will agree with Mr. Constant on that. I think it was the best decision we made as a body. But I will say, when you're not, sorry, my daughters are fighting in the background. When we're not sitting there saying that it's okay for them to be silenced, even though they're not really talking about any particular item number, then we have to go into the fact, well, if we have people talking, but we don't like what they're saying, or we don't believe it's relevant to the item number, how do we draw a line there? So we're saying stand there peacefully, don't say anything. It doesn't really have anything to do with anything. But if you say something and we don't like what you say, we're going to tell you, be quiet, move on, stop talking, or sit down, or your time is up. So I think there's a fine line. So we have to be open to it all. So I don't know where you're going to draw the line, Chair. That's up to you.
Thanks, Jamie, for that question. So, from my perspective, I think there's a difference between testifying on an item that's before the body and protest. And so if an individual wants to provide testimony on an item that we have before us, then, you all know how I operate and how I do that, right? Has to 3 minutes, stay on topic. I will pause your time and ask you to stay on topic. But if an individual wants to protest, and that is their intent, then I will do the same thing, give them their 3 minutes. But what an individual does not have the right to do is repeatedly have their 3 minutes to protest, because that is disruptive to the orderly business of the body. And that is when I would stop that member or that individual from continuing to disrupt the business of the body.
Felix, just can I follow up a bit?
Yeah, go ahead, Crystal.
You know, I understand how delicate and sensitive this all can be. And we certainly don't want somebody to feel like they're not being heard. But that's kind of my point in all of this. When the person was laying there on the floor, I mean, I was, phoning in that day. So I'm watching all of this just from seeing the screen on my computer. And I had no idea why the person was there. I had no idea if, even if they were okay. But I certainly didn't understand what the message was they were trying to get out. So therefore, they weren't really protesting. They were just disrupting. And I had other people ask me the same thing. Why was that person doing that? And I didn't have an answer for them, because that person never spoke specifically to what they were doing. Now, at some point, they might have gotten up and held a sign. So I guess I'm saying, okay, the idea of people in the audience holding a sign, if that's their protest, that's fine. We all get that, and they have the ability to do that. If somebody walks up and speaks for 3 minutes, they have the ability to say what they want to say. My concern is, for that specific incident, there was somebody basically disrupting everything for hours. I mean, that person was there for a very long time. And everybody that walked up to the podium to speak to the whole assembly had to look past whatever that was going on between them and the people they were addressing on the assembly. That's where I kind of thought, that's a line that we should have been able to draw. Now, if the person on the floor wanted to hold their protest in the back of the room, or they, like I said, if they wanted to sit up and hold a sign, whatever. But the fact that they were right there in front of the chair's position and in between those who were speaking on other items in the assembly, I thought was unfair. So I'm hoping that we'll look at things like that a little more critically, and either invite that person to get up and say what they need to say. But when they're done with that 3 minutes, they need to be in a different place other than in between the public and the assembly. Because that did send a message, I think. And that's what I think we need to be careful of. So end of thought. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll go ahead and address that specific instance. I will say I have made public apologies already for how I handled that instance. So I will do so again. And if I were to handle that instance differently, I would do what I had said earlier, which is if a silent protest like that is happening, then I will likely pause the meeting, because it's weird to ask for order when something silent is happening. I will pause the meeting. I will approach the individuals. I will ask them to have their 3 minutes, and then to be done with their silent protest, or do it in a different manner that isn't disruptive to the order of the body. I put, like I think I've said this in the past, that very night, I considered how I could have handled that situation differently. And as I've committed to this body, it will be handled differently into the future. Chris?
Yep. Felix, I just want to say thank you. I mean, I'm not looking for an apology. I just want to make sure that that's something that isn't being overlooked for next time. And you explained that very well. So I'm satisfied with that answer. So thank you.
Thanks.
Yep, thanks. I think you recognize me, Mr. Chair.
Sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
So, yeah, it was such an interesting dilemma that, because I just could visualize an intervention with them being dragged out on video and how ugly that would be for all of us and what we wouldn't want. And so it definitely was a confounding moment. And while we're on the topic of this, there's one form of protest that started the mask mandate protest of late, is to just sit there with a fork and some popcorn in your mouth the whole time, like licking your spoon for the whole 5-hour meeting so you don't have to wear a mask in the chamber. And that's new, and it's something that certainly raises concerns for me, because if we're serious about that mask behavior, then we have to think about food in the chamber, because that's the latest. I mean, they were throwing bags of chips back and forth to each other in the chambers as they had their feet up on the back of chairs in the chambers. And so I'm not sure what we do about that, but that is certainly the thing that I noticed lately.
Thank you. So I think the rules that we have on that, I think are fairly clear, but maybe not. So there are some exceptions to wearing a mask, and I think the exceptions are based on the term sort of, yeah, I realize that, Austin. So I will try to move us on as quickly as we can. So the terms are based on sort of briefly doing things. So briefly speaking, briefly eating, briefly drinking. What I would suggest, if members feel like something doesn't feel right, that is absolutely the appropriate time to declare a point of order, and I would suggest that members do so. So I'm going to turn to Jamie, and then I'm going to move us on.
I was going to bring that up too. If we're going to have rules and mandates, and everybody kind of needs to follow them. And I think trying to be sneaky, and I saw that too with the chips flying in the air, it was really disrespectful to the chambers. It's disrespectful to everybody else who's abiding by the rules. And it's disrespectful to the assembly members who are also trying to abide by the rules. So I agree that maybe we can address it somehow, because that's not okay behavior. Thank you.
All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next topic. So I have one presentation to cover the next two topics, and I am just going to try to go as quickly as I can through these. So I think Barbara's putting that up. So I'm going to go ahead and just introduce it while Barbara's putting it up. So the next two topics are around the Coronavirus Relief Fund, specifically two different pots. So one, $50,000 that was approved for communications around CARES Act funding allocations. And then the second was around $175,000 that was approved for Assembly Department. I'm just going to start going through this, and then Barbara will catch up. So both of these items were before us on July 28th. That's when we considered and approved both of these items. The first item is AR 2020-273. That's 10E7 on that agenda. So it set aside $50,000 for the purpose of, quote, funding an outreach education program on the uses of CARES Act funding, end quote. So there are two phases to this. So the first phase was before we approved the CARES Act package in August. The work that was done with Northwest Strategies was to basically create the website and solicit feedback and try to get as much get it out there as much as we could in the community, so they knew that this was happening and that they could provide feedback if they wanted to the assembly. So that was done. I have heard the criticisms that it wasn't done, that there wasn't enough time, and all of those are valid criticisms. Then after the CARES Act funding was approved in August, it switched to informing the public about what we passed and about the programs being rolled. So over the next week or so, there should be an overhaul of the website completed to provide more information to the public at the request of several members. Suzanne brought up one of those items earlier, discussing the need to put up more information on the programs and FAQs and this other things, and a dashboard has been discussed, and members are more than willing to come to me and ask me about any specific items that they would like us to, like me to work with Northwest Strategies to update the website on. But as I've said, over the next week or so, you'll see a good overhaul of the website. Okay, so then stop right now and ask to extend, let's just say 10 minutes, but I won't use it all.
Move to extend.
Second.
Okay, is there any opposition? Okay. All right, so that was the 50,000. I think of note, 16,109 has been spent. I doubt by the end of the year we'll have spent half of that 50,000. So any questions on that before we move on to the other part? Okay, so the next part is the 175,000. So next slide, please. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, just I want to reiterate for the record here, and know that I'm going to try to figure out a way to bring this forward, that as we move into the budget process, we should take some of those dollars and have a very public series of long meetings where we can hash out with the public invited kind of priorities and challenges to the budget in relationship to the COVID pandemic for 2021. So I just want to put that out there.
Sure, and that's actually going to be addressed here in a minute, but that's great. So the 175,000 that was allocated, that was AR 2020-273, the same day we deliberated on that one. That was for two different things, and it was described in the AM. So first was 50,000 for the Assembly Council's office for purposes of a contract, attorney, and office management to assist with the increased work demands related to the COVID-19 emergency. Second part was 125,000 to the Anchorage Assembly for purposes of increasing assembly capacity through additional aid hours and hiring additional staff, quote. So that's how it was described in the AMs. So next slide, please. So first we'll start with the Assembly Council's office. So as described to the Assembly via email, I think Dean described it, and then I described it at an Assembly meeting. The Assembly Council led the effort to find and select the contractor to bring on board. They worked through the Alaska Bar Association. They did the whole process like normal, source memo with justification approved by purchasing department. Of total, there hasn't been much spent, which is surprising because I think Dennis has actually done a fair bit of work, but maybe he's very efficient. So 2,200 of this allocation has been spent through the through August. So we haven't gotten any of the September invoices yet for these contracts. Next is the 125 to finish up the 175. So after approval, I reviewed the record of the meeting, the intent, and solicited feedback from sponsors, as well as Assembly leadership to produce the spending plan. The spending plan was emailed to you all and feedback was requested, and then it was also shared in an Assembly meeting. Of note, all of these positions are through the end of the year. So far, $0 of that 125 has been spent. Next slide will detail what those positions are for. So as described both at an Assembly meeting and via email, here are the positions. So the 2 full-time contract aides, the 1 part-time contract aide for, so the 2 full-time aides are for COVID-19 specific. I think every Assembly member is going to have sort of different ideas of the work that they want these aides to do. In fact, it was asked at a community council, and I answered with a response. Meg had a different response, and John didn't respond, but if he did, I'm sure he would have had a third response. So I think there are probably 11 different responses of items that these aides could do for Assembly members related to COVID-19. Then the communications assistant, that's a part-time contract aide to assist with enhanced communications needs of Assembly members, COVID-19 related and otherwise. I included, as sort of Chris had suggested, budget stuff. And, you know, we've seen a highly increased need to communicate effectively with our constituents. So this is part of helping to do that. Then the IT assistant is the, Barbara talked a little bit about that earlier, about the needs in the clerk's office. So this was one of their requests, helping out with Teams and Zoom and other duties that have just eaten up a lot of time from Barbara and from Desiree and from Jen and others. And so this is going to help alleviate that. The 2 Zoom licenses, that was an idea that several Assembly members had. So to be shared among Assembly members to host various constituent meetings virtually. Then supplies to meet the needs of any of the contract workers that we're bringing on, so small dollar amount there. And then unspent, and it looks like Desiree has clarified that the unspent is actually higher than that. It's 68,000. No plans right now to expend the money, but it depends on the work projects that are assigned to the contract workers, whether we actually expend any of that money or not. Okay, so that was the quick part. Austin, I think you had wanted to add a minute or two on the aid.
Sure, yeah. I just wanted to let everyone know that we solicited applications and received quite a few. We closed, the period for applications closed last Thursday. By Friday, the clerk's office sent John and Crystal and I a comprehensive package of all of the applications. The 3 of us reviewed them on our own over the weekend, and then on Monday met and had a long discussion about who we wanted to interview. We selected 5 people to interview, and we worked on interview questions from questions Barbara had used in the clerk's office. So she sent us those. And then I asked my aide to just come up with aide specific type questions. Crystal and John and I then took that draft and kind of revamped it and turned it into something we all thought made sense. We conducted all 5 of those interviews on Wednesday afternoon, and we're planning to make a decision this weekend. We have a meeting set up tomorrow morning. So that's where we're at, and we hope to get, I think most of the folks that were interested in potentially would be available pretty much right away. So anyway, we'll keep you posted, but it should be soon. I think what would be important is, and I sent an email to this effect earlier this week, but starting to identify projects that we have. I think Felix shared, or if he hasn't yet, I should share that what we're hoping to do is have Desiree serve somewhat as an in-between or a manager of the 2 aides. You know, given that there are 2 of them, it could be hard to manage, and they'll have 11 bosses each. It could be hard to manage their workload. So our plan is to have Desiree kind of manage project requests, figure out how long they'll take, assign them to the right aide, and just be a little bit of a go-between. And anyway, so welcome feedback on that. I think Felix has some ideas too, and we'll keep you posted. But if you have projects, please start letting us know, I guess letting Desiree know specifically, so that we can get folks to work right when we have them. Thanks.
Come on. Thanks, Austin. So with that, unfortunately, so if folks have any questions based off of this, or you need some clarification, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to provide any further clarification. But unfortunately, we don't have time to do that right now. I need to move on to audience participation and then close out the meeting, and then we have a work session in a minute. So with that, Mr. Haberman, I'm going to ask you to keep your comments brief. I'm going to give you, unfortunately, 1 minute for your comments. So go ahead, Mr. Haberman.
1 minute. First, that's a violation of state law, providing a reasonable opportunity to be heard, and you let that situation occur. Second is there is a note on the Rules Committee website section. There was no agenda there for the public to see. There was only one presentation dealing with decorum, and your last presentation it was not available on the site. So the public's working blind. Now it appears that you're seeing materials among yourselves, but the public's not seeing it. That's not running the meeting fair and transparent. And then I listen attentively of all subjects, decorum and process and all that. If you ever hear of an expert than me, but certainly you giving me a minute to speak, obviously you do not want to hear an expert to deal with what you're addressing. And I could not help to see that you wanted to follow Robert's rules, but then you have this other line there that says that, well, if you have a routine of doing it, then you get away around Robert's Rules of Order. And that ends my time because you want to make sure that it's addressed.
Thank you, Mr. Haberman. With that, this meeting is adjourned, and I'll see everyone at the next work session.